Okay. Welcome back to this week's episode of Self Coaching Saturday. Today, we're going to talk about meet day preparedness. All of the training that we do as powerlifters is typically centered around the idea that at some point we will be competing either in front of other people or against ourselves to beat our previous max performances on the squat, bench, and deadlift. So when it comes to the psychological aspect of preparing for a competition, it's really important to understand what variables are useful and contribute to your success on the platform. So in today's episode, we'll be talking about meet day preparedness with an emphasis on the psychological considerations to developing yourself and preparing yourself for the best performance that you can achieve. So we're going to do this in a few different ways. Well, not a few different ways, but we're going to kind of go over the things that I think are important to consider when preparing for a meet. So I guess let's get started here. How much do we show here? All right. Maybe this isn't the best view. All right. Okay, so what is the most important thing to understand when we're preparing for a meet? I'd argue understanding what you would like to get out of the competition or of like the mock meet that you're testing. What's the point? Why are you going to put yourself under pressure? Why are you going to expose yourself to vulnerability? Why are you interested in pushing your maximum potential on a day? So step one, specify your intentions. Okay. This means we want to get detailed. Be detailed with your intentions. Maybe your intentions are, I want to test my abilities to see what I am capable of. And, that's relatively broad, but it also allows you to set the stage that the competition is not, the purpose of the competition in this scenario is not, I want to hit very specific numbers, but more so, I want to cultivate a mindset on this day that allows me to push and see what I'm capable of. And framing it like this would be much more process-based versus outcome-based. So by setting yourself up and putting yourself in a scenario where on meet day, as long as you test your ability, you push your abilities to the max and you see what you're capable of, that could be considered a successful day. And the reason why that is important is because often athletes feel like there's only one type of meet day performance. It's either PR on everything or bust. If you don't hit a PR on your squat, bench, or deadlift, or your total, and it wasn't worth it. But we have to understand that meet day and competitions are something that even the highest level athletes must practice to perfect. For example, in the NBA, in the NBA finals, you have some of the best athletes in the world competing against each other to try to outperform one another. And even some of the best ranked athletes who are supposed to win, and the best teams are supposed to win, lose because they're were other variables contributing to their success than simply their raw stat line prior to the competition. That's why the psychological approach to the day can make a big difference, especially in crucial moments. A lot of times in powerlifting competitions, the strongest athlete doesn't necessarily win. However, the smartest, or not smartest, but the athlete with the best plan who can adapt to the situation and is very honest with what they want from their own training gets the most out of the day, and sometimes can win. But so that might be like, I want to beat my competitors. Okay, so that's another example of something that you could do. You could just say, my goal is to beat my competitors. This is a externally motivated intention, meaning that your day is going to be dictated by not only your performance, but also the performance that you can control of the other athletes on the platform. I typically discourage this type of mindset simply because we don't know typically who's going to be there. We don't know where they're coming from. We don't know what they're capable of. And it can eliminate the variables that are useful and do matter for how you perform and how you can, express yourself on the day. So being aware of that could influence it. However, some athletes love the external motivation, and maybe even if they don't succeed, they're not going to, quit powerlifting. Because the thing we want to avoid is burnout, and we want to make sure that even our meet day intentions are sustainable. So suggestions, these should be sustainable, meaning that if you do not succeed, it will not result in you leaving the sport. Now, if you want to leave the sport if you don't reach your goals, then fine. But it's just not a suggestion that I have. I think that is short-sighted because, again, most of the best powerlifters compete for many, many years. They don't always win, but they do always come back into training after the competition and push and try to adapt to what they learn from their competitors and learn from themselves on game day. Okay, so another example, I want to hit a PR on my squat, match my previous bench press PR, and let's say your deadlift is kind of behind right now because you're recovering from an injury, and you just want to make sure you hit something. So, and at least 70% of my max deadlift on game day. Okay, so these goals are more internally motivated goals, which means that the goals that we have are driven by our own previous experiences, and it's an autonomous decision, and it has no, relation to other athletes. It's just you and what you've been able to achieve while considering the context in which you're competing. A lot of times athletes will compete and then completely ignore the conditions in which they had developed their training. So maybe they were injured and they ignore that, or they didn't have the greatest prep, momentum wasn't very good, but they still want to compete and show up. So they completely forget that there's this other side of the journey, and they're just thinking about the outcome, but the outcome is determined by the journey and the process that they took. So I love internally motivated goals because you can make them based off of reality and your material reality versus material idealism. So we're not idealizing, or we don't have an ideology around like what has to happen on game day without context, because that can really set yourself up for failure. If every single time you compete, you have to hit an all-time PR. Now, one would argue, well, why compete if you're not going to hit a PR? I would say that it's useful to practice the act of competing because you're probably going to not understand some aspects of the sport that might slip you up a little bit. For example, variables. Well, let's just say step 2. Familiarize yourself with game day. Let's just say common practice / rules. As an experienced meet day coach, one thing that always trips athletes up is that the meet warm-up room is not their warm-up room. What I mean by that is you have all these other competitors that need to access the same exact equipment that you're using so that they can prepare for the meet, which means that if there is limited equipment, you have to communicate with the other coaches and the other athletes about when your warm-up will be and when to provide access to the equipment for the other athletes. And this is something that if you don't get dialed in, it's going to increase your anxiety a lot because you won't have that familiarity with that communication and that shared space. And it might not let you might even miss a lot of your warm-ups because you don't have enough time. Okay? So communicate early with your fellow competitors and their coaches. Establish good rapport with people in your weight class, height category. Because if you are squatting, for example, and everyone in the platform is a similar height, it doesn't take as long to adjust the rack. So typically I recommend trying to find a group of people that are around the same height as you, where if you do need to adjust the rack, it's a minimal adjustment. And the weight selection is also not too drastic so that not everyone is warming up with the exact same weight in the same tempo of that weight jump. Because obviously if you have someone opening very heavy and you have a lifter that's just like way stronger than you, their warm-ups are going to need to be heavier than yours, and it's going to feel awkward and it might take up too much time that you don't have if you want to prepare properly. So find athletes with similar openers to warm up with. This is a time saver. And it's always better to have more time than less time. It's much better to be more prepared and more flexible with your warm-ups than very rigid with your warm-ups, because you don't have control over how many people are in need of the platform or how many warm-ups that they have. And you want to be more flexible, and having more time is easier if you have a good relationship with all the other athletes. Well, not all of the athletes, but as many athletes as you can that would be sharing the platform with you and the warm-up platform with you. Okay. Another thing, make sure that you pay attention to the meet-specific rules. What I mean by that is sometimes there are locations in which you can walk through after you hit your openers or your each attempt, so that you don't run into another athlete, or you don't run into like a coach or something because you're not walking in the right direction. So just make sure you pay attention to where should you go after you complete the lift. Should you go to the right or to the left? Where is the scorer's table, so that you can tell them within a minute what your next lift is going to be, and where should you put like all of your equipment and stuff so that no one's like tripping, because that's another thing I've seen. I think in Raw Nationals 2016 there was a competition in Atlanta, and it was all on like smooth marble, like marble concrete or marbleized concrete, and it was super slippery and everyone was falling over. Some people would get really excited and then they'd slip on the concrete and land on their back, and it was messed up. So just make sure you're aware of your surroundings. All right. Step 3. And ideally this is probably like either before or after, understanding the game day rules. Probably this would be step 2, because if you haven't been to the meet yet, you probably won't know what the meet day rules are going to be. So just call this step 2. And this step 3, create a meet card. This is your lifeline. Okay. The meet card allows you to take a look at the objective data. Takes the objective data from your training history combined with your subjective data and combined with the subjective data and your goals to establish a plan. These can be very simple or they can be complicated. An example of a simple plan would be you just have a meet card with your warm-ups and your opener. Sorry, just your opener, second and third attempt. So plan A, plan B, plan C, or attempt 1, 2, and 3. Like no flexibility. Ideally, these allow for some auto regulation to adapt to the circumstances of the day. Because you don't know how you're going to perform. You don't know how well the warm-ups are going to feel. You don't know what your competitors are going to be doing. So you want to flex the template in a way that makes it easy for you to make a decision, has flexible options based off of some metric. So for example, if your opener is at a 7.5, then jump 5%. If your second attempt is at a 9, then jump 5%. Okay, so these are good, like, rough metrics that would provide insight on, okay, that felt good, we're going plan A. Because you have 60 seconds after you hit your weight or your opener or your second attempt to go to the scoring table and tell them what you want on the second attempt. You don't want to be looking at your video, looking at your meet card, trying to make some mathematical calculations. You want to have a range where you can work with, make adjustments quickly based off how you felt, and trust your gut and put the weight on the bar that you think you can hit. Now, of course, if the stakes are higher, you might need to spend, literally 60 seconds before you make your decision. But if the stakes aren't as high, then just go with your gut and maybe you leave a little bit more in the tank. But if you need a certain weight to win, maybe put that on the bar, even if it's a bit outside of your flexible goals. Now, if you have a coach, and I think this needs to be, again, pushed back a little bit because I'm kind of jumping ahead. This is going to be schedule a call with your coach. The reason why this is useful is because it allows you to verbally express the things that you have either already written down or your first time where you can discuss what you want to do. But verbalizing your goals to someone you trust can help to establish a sense of reality for the lifter. What I mean by that is, if you've ever competed before, you know the feeling that occurs sometimes hours, sometimes minutes, sometimes days prior to the competition, where you realize, wow, I'm going to be competing today. And this is an important day. And I all of a sudden feel nervous. I don't even know what I want from the day. I haven't told anybody. Does anyone know what's in my head? Does anyone know what my goals are? Maybe you don't talk to your coach. Maybe talk to a friend or a fellow lifter. But talking to someone about what you want makes it reality, and it can help you to establish whether or not the goals you set are realistic, because now you have someone to reference those with and help you to kind of contextualize what the meet is in the context of your long-term training career. So having a call with your coach can be useful. You can also go over the meet card with them, make sure they are comfortable with your warm-ups, make sure they're comfortable with your openers. I want to add something to the meet day card. So like easy or like simple would be 3 attempts for each lift, minimal flexibility. Intermediate would be like 6 attempts, 3 options for each attempt for each lift minus the opener, because you don't really want to have like 3 options for your opener. Ideally, an opener is something that you can hit. You've hit before in the gym. Maybe you've done it for like 3 repetitions in the gym before. Like you're going to hit that, on a bad day. However, your second and your third attempts are going to be better off having a few options, either plan A, plan B, or C, or just like plan A and plan B. If it was easy, go for plan A. If it was hard, go for plan B, something like that. Advanced would be 3 options for each attempt and pre-planned warm-ups to optimize energy efficiency. This is something that you have to dial in. There's no like, hey, this is how you must warm up if you want to optimize energy efficiency. You have to figure out how can you warm up as minimally as possible while still feeling prepared. For example, I was at a competition in San Jose last week, and someone asked me, hey, what should I do should I hit my opener before I walk out? And I said, no, because, you have a second and a third attempt. You don't want to hit your opener twice and then your second and then your third. That's just going to be too much energy that you put into proving that you're capable of the opener on the day. There's always going to be some uncertainty, and that is why we want the opener to be something that we're pretty comfortable with and have hit before, so at least you can get over that mental hurdle that you might experience during training. All right. So once you have familiarized yourself with the meet day rules and common practice, I would say find the screens / scoreboard. The scoreboard is something that athletes tend not to look at because it's kind of stressful. But if you don't have someone handling you or coaching you on the day, you want to know where the scoreboard is, because the scoreboard is going to indicate when your next attempt will be. So you want to always have a good eye on how close your next attempt will be, so you can plan your post-lift rest, your hydration, if you have to use the restroom. Find the scoreboard. This will inform you of the order in which your next attempt will be. The key here is that your next attempt will not necessarily be in the same order as your previous attempt, obviously, because it's an order of how heavy the next lift is. So it's always lightest to heaviest in powerlifting, and you have 3 lifts. So the next lift your next lift might be lighter than the jump that the person before you made. So you might be third in the flight. You open at 150 kilos. The second competitor, the second lifter, is opening at 145. You hit 150 and you jump 5 kilos to 155. They hit 145 and jump 15 kilos to 160. Well, now you're going to be before them. So make sure to know where everyone is after you hit your first attempt and after you've input your next attempt, so that you don't get confused and miss your lift. I see this so often where people get too comfortable with their position on the scoreboard or on the platform, and they don't realize that someone made a change, and then they miss their lift or they're super rush, and it doesn't give them the confidence that you need. You should be ready 4 lifters before, you should be like mentally completely ready around 4 lifters before you end up going. If you're kind of like aloof and then like you're 4 lifters out and you got to get your wrist wraps on and your belt and your chalk, that's a lot to do in 4 athletes, and that gives you a buffer. Like you'll have plenty of time to do that. But if you do that 1 lifter out, and now you're in a different mental situation, and it might be too much stress for you to handle and perform optimally. So I guess step 6, stay aware of your position time in relation to your attempts. Okay, so that's just more preparation is better than less. I mentioned it earlier. More time is better than less time. You just don't want to have an athlete or yourself freaking out, because that might make you rush a command. You might miss on a technical thing because you're so focused on the fact that you relate to the platform that you forget, oh yeah, you need to wait to get the command for the squat, but you have 5 seconds, so you rushed it because you forgot that you need to wait for the command. And I would say, actually, before all of this, like this is step 0. Like this is just, you decided to sign up for a competition. Make sure you know the rules and practice them. That means pause for 1 or 2 count on your competition bench, because you're waiting for the judge to give you the press command and the start command. So you want to unrack the bar, hold it, wait till press, bring it to the chest, wait for wait to the start, bring it to your chest, wait for the press up, hold it, wait for the rack. The amount of times I've seen athletes miss on bench press because they forget to rack the bar, and they forget to wait to rack the bar is too high. So you want to practice these in training, weeks before you compete, so it's part of your identity to perform the lifts to the competition standard. And for those that don't know, on the squat, it's squat, then you squat, then you stand up, hold, rack, and you walk back into the rack. And for deadlift, there's no start command. You just pull within the time limit that you have. It's usually 2 minutes. Actually, I think it's 60 seconds. And then down. So they're going to give you the down command when you have successfully locked out the lift, or if you failed and they want you to just drop it so you don't get hurt. So make sure you practice. And then I will say that after the competition happens, reflect. After a competition, you have the opportunity to be introspective and retrospective. What could you have done better to prepare for this competition? How can you use that information to make better decisions for the next competition? What do you need more practice in for each lift so that you feel more prepared? Where did you feel like you were lacking? What did you feel strong at? What did you feel you did a great job of? What should you double down on in your next competition? What aspects of your training do you think helped you to feel more prepared for this meet? And if would you repeat the training block that you just used so that you'd have a better outcome in the competition, or do you think you need to change everything up? Typically, I recommend only changing a few things, because if you got to the competition and you hit a PR or 2, it's probably likely that most of what you were doing in training was useful, And perhaps it wasn't just the training that needs to be adjusted. Maybe you need to get better sleep or better food or better mindset. Maybe you need to meditate more, visualize your training more. But after the meet, after the last lifter is done, enjoy the meet, of course. Enjoy your successes. Enjoy the fact that you put a lot of effort into showing up, being vulnerable, and potentially reaching those goals that you set earlier in that week or in that month, because it matters how we frame things, and it matters how we experience these moments in our life. So those are the 7 steps to effective meet day coaching or meet day readiness. Number 1 or 0, make sure you know the rules of powerlifting and practice them in your training. Step 1, specify your intentions, be detailed. They should be sustainable. They should maybe be achievable, hopefully. It is okay if they're not achievable, but ideally you want to believe they're achievable. I typically prefer internally motivated goals versus externally motivated goals. However, you can have externally motivated goals if you want. Just be aware that you have less control over those. So be more prepared for what happens if you don't reach them, if they're out of your control. And obviously you can have both externally and internally motivated goals and just kind of rank them, in terms of priority. You want to create a meet card based off of your objective data from your training and the subjective data of your training so that you have an established plan. Most meet cards all meet cards are going to at least have, first, second, and third attempts for each lift. Most meet cards should have multiple options for each lift based off how the previous lift felt, so that you have some flexibility and you can dial in your decision with time pressure being important and minimal time to review, a video, for example. And a more advanced meet card would involve multiple options for each attempt and pre-planned warm-ups to optimize efficiency, as well as your goals written down. These allow for some auto-regulation. Step 3, schedule a call with your coach or a trusted friend to talk about your goals to make them more real. If you're in the community, you can always hop on these self-coaching calls and talk about your experiences. Number 4, familiarize yourself with game day common practices and rules. So, either you can look it up on the website or you can wait until meet day where they go over the rules, typically only at local meets. And then common practices. How are the other people in the gym or in the training facility operating? Where should you move? Where is the scores table? Where do you need to go when you complete each lift? How do you enter the platform? Are there any cords in the way, etc.? Find the screens and scoreboard. The scoreboard / the screens are going to give you information. They're going to have typically videos of the other athletes actually lifting, or they will have the scoreboard so you know where you are in the flight, so you don't miss your lift, and so you can prepare effectively for each lift. 6, stay aware of your position and time. Again, this is dependent on knowing where the scoreboard is. You could also ask. You could just watch. You could pay attention. If you didn't have a scoreboard, you could literally just look at the audience's view and see who's up, but I wouldn't recommend that because you're probably going to only have 60 seconds then to get ready for the lift, because you have to wait for platform ready or bars loaded before you can go. And then step 7 is after you actually perform the lifts and you finish the meet, reflect on your experience. What could you have done better? What did you do well? What should you double down on? What do you want to change, if anything? And thank the people that were at the meet that helped make it happen, because these things are usually self-funded. They're usually pretty expensive. They take a lot of time, sometimes a lot of volunteers, though I wish there were no volunteers. It's nice to have people get paid for hard, laborious effort. And enjoy the fact that you did the thing. It's not easy to put yourself in a position where you're vulnerable and exposing yourself and your true athletic potential. So hopefully that was useful, and you can use that for your next meet. If you've never competed before and you're curious and you have more questions about competing, make sure you let me know. Otherwise, have a good rest of your weekend, and I'll see you guys later.